Foreign Policy Camp was a hybrid conference that Canada's World decided to do in accordance with a bunch of other organizations. All of us were sort of interested in the same idea to hold a conference that was related to foreign policy, but also sort of activated a lot of people that wouldn't normally go to these types of conferences.
Foreign Policy Camp was a gathering of different people with a variety of interests on the subject of foreign policy, be they government participants or non-government actors or people in cultural industries who have an interest in how Canada's views are represented abroad and how Canada's interests and values are represented on the world stage in a wide variety of sectors.
We tried to go away from the very structured conferences that people had typically been at, where you had, you know, from time A to time B was going to be this presenter saying this topic.
So we really wanted to do a conference that would be fun and innovative and use innovative technology and tools that are more interesting for younger people and for people who might not, you know, be already in the world of foreign policy.
A camp was created, a gathering of people in Vancouver. So it was a one-day gathering at Simon Fraser University.
I suggested that Canada's World do a foreign policy camp because I'd been involved with a few camps before, primarily Change Camp, which was a huge 150-person conference in Vancouver on open government and citizen participation. And I know that these kinds of models are really pushing the edge of what you can do when you get people together in a room. The idea behind a camp is that there's no preset agenda or very little preset agenda, and lots of opportunity for participants to come in and say, this is what we want to talk about today, this is what we want to do, and let's collaboratively figure this out together. And because Canada's World was so much about emphasizing citizen participation and openness and citizen decision making, it was just such a perfect fit.
The whole notion of an unconference really capitalizes on those hallway conversations, those in-between moments where you have aha, eureka moments and connect with people who are interested in the same thing as you. I think I would explain Foreign Policy Camp as an event designed to break down barriers and false perceptions of who gets to have a say in Canada's foreign policy.
For me, that was an interesting experiment and an important experiment about how do we take, you know, a dialogue process, a survey, a series of pieces of research, and then turn that into a conference that looks very different from the typical foreign policy conferences that are available to Canadians. And how do we do this in a way that is meaningful and at the same time engages a whole range of people?
I thought it was an extremely ambitious undertaking, and I was thrilled to be invited to participate. I had no idea really what to expect.
As one of the core organizers for Foreign Policy Camp, it's been an amazing experience, and I'm very grateful for the incredible people who have come through as our collaborators.
Around the table there were very different kinds of people from different kinds of professional and personal backgrounds that were coming together to try to flesh out what this hybrid unconference was going to be and where it should go. So it was definitely as much about coming to a collective understanding as a group of organizers as it was you know, ticking off all the boxes in the conventional sort of way when you plan a conference or event of this kind.
I'd never got involved in organizing a conference before, and I have to admit that I was very reluctant to embrace the whole camp idea at the beginning, because I couldn't understand, you know, what, you're going to have 400 people come and you're not going to have an agenda, and it's just going to kind of throw people in and it'll be decided on the spot. So I had to kind of overcome some prejudices, if you will, in terms of how a conference should be organized. As the time went by and I got to know the people, and almost completely, you know, with a few exceptions, volunteers doing it, became a little more comfortable and saw the value in the process. I'd like to think that I embraced it wholeheartedly.
There was innumerable planning activities, mainly conference calls, stitching people in from across the country as we put the wheels on the event.
We had meetings every 2 weeks. At times it was challenging to, meet those commitments, but at the same time it really pushed people, I think, and that pushing and that intensity made the process all the more rewarding.
There were many different lessons learned in our emergent process, but the one that I think is really important to keep in mind is the point at which we came to a strong consensus to shift from unconference to what we called a hybrid conference. It was a decision that we made based on a lot of the organizers reflecting back to us the challenges they were facing in getting certain experts, officials, volunteers, participants to commit their time and resources coming all the way to the West Coast for an event. If it had been an unconference where we really couldn't say in advance what might happen on the day, what subjects might be talked about, or if or what any outcomes might be.
I didn't think it was really, as workable if you just kind of let everything go from the true camp fashion.
People really wanted clear objectives and clear outcomes, even though they were still very excited by the idea of having some space for innovation and creative thinking.
We wanted to combine more open source methodologies, which are really popular in the unconference movement right now, with more traditional conference-based elements such as, planning certain things in advance and, giving academics an area where they also felt comfortable. So molding those two things together made it really successful for a really wide variety of people.
Given the fact that there are some principal areas of concern with regard to foreign policy, be they Canada's participation in Afghanistan or Latin America, the rise of Asia Pacific or Latin America, it was broken down into a set group of case studies for the exploration of certain issues.
We had, 6 or 7 structured sessions in advance, known, planned out. Then we had any number of events or new issues that came up on the day in the opening session.
There was the forum for discussion on any given topic, but there also was a framework, or in a conference speaks, more of a track that you could follow within it.
We had a couple overarching themes, but around those themes there was no really structured script or dialogue. We had a few experts in the field that came into a room, and we essentially just had an open opportunity to have dialogue.
Its commitment to preserving kind of a core structure is comforting to people who are otherwise a little, still wary of a completely unstructured conversation, whether it's because they're sensitive to how much time they can commit to something with unforeseeable outcomes, etc. It piques people's interest without scaring them off. A lot of times I find, closed-door roundtables or expert dialogues tend to scare off people who know more than they think they know, whose input would otherwise be totally absent from the conversations.
I think there are different types of people, and I think you probably going to appeal to a broader audience if you have a hybrid. From a expert participant point of view, the people who come who are your quasi-experts, I may be wrong about this, but I have a sense that they probably prefer a little bit more of that structure where they have a role that's more or less defined.
I think it was the best decision possible, and I think it's really essential in terms of bringing these kinds of formats into new fields, and particularly one like foreign policy.
The new media component of it was really a defining feature.
I finally saw how Twitter can work beyond telling people what they had for lunch.
From the onset, we decided we wanted to use as many innovative technologies as possible. We had tweet clouds and hashtags and did things through Facebook by having Facebook profile pics that had fun sayings on them.
I loved how they incorporated a lot of blogging, a lot of wiki into it.
We created this campaign to have people write on small post-its sort of what they saw for the future of Canadian foreign policy. The campaign ended up being really great. There was, I think, over 60 to 80 photos that were submitted, and we were able to use those throughout the camp. I created a website myself through hand scripting XHTML and CSS, trying to make the website really interactive and use a lot of tools at once.
The ongoing commitment as the event was unfolding to real-time connectivity using all kinds of media, the feed-in of the survey questions to the discussions as they were unfolding during the day, the magnificent and highly innovative Mashboard.
The Mashboard was conceived as a way to get a full cross-section of all discussions that were going on at Foreign Policy Camp. It's a conflation of two different terms. When you bring together multiple technologies right now, it's called a mashup, where you bring together, say, a Google map with a Flickr photo gallery and all the different applications that are out there. So we brought together different elements called widgets, where we had anything that was being said on Twitter right now was represented on that site. And there was also a survey that was created as well, where the responses on Canada's role and leadership in the world in various regards were brought together. The survey results were presented on the Mashboard, the Twitter comments were presented on the Mashboard, and those discussions were amalgamated into one single place and then graphically represented to show what the cumulative conversation was. So you can get a sense of what is the flavor of the camp.
So people that were outside of Foreign Policy Camp could still see the tweets that were happening, the updates from people who were blogging online and be able to provide those updates.
Taking It Global was kind enough to give us some of their really innovative chat software, which allowed people to participate virtually who weren't able to be there.
We were able to use the internet to network all the different events together. So you had the event in Vancouver, of course you had another one in Toronto. We were able to broadcast sort of the events in different times and what was happening, so people could get involved, whether they're in Toronto, they'd be physically on location, they could still check in with what was happening in Vancouver.
Some of the workshops were lucky enough to have participants from Latin America or different countries that weren't able to physically be there, be involved, and a lot of participants in those workshops said it was really valuable for them to have that kind of interaction.
So it was really well networked and just a place to ensure that the ideas that were being shared were able to be captured by everyone.
I remember us staying up really late the night before and crazily planning last minute things and thinking the whole time, what if no one shows up? And on the day of, it was packed.
Going down just before it started, hundreds of people in the room, all full of energy and excited. But the most notable thing was how many of them were young.
There was young people, there was people who were just getting into foreign policy, there was foreign policy experts that were around.
The range of people, the socioeconomic range, the age range, the gender diversity, the ethnocultural diversity was terrific.
It was not the usually highly staged, managed, quite predictable and often boring sort of event that these things frequently kind of decline into. It was brimming with energy.
Probably my favorite moment was at the very beginning of the conference when Monkey came up and addressed the audience. I was sitting in front of somebody I'd worked before in the academic circles. I saw people who were obviously unsure of what to expect of a certain older generation sitting next to somebody who looked like they were from high school, and suddenly you hand out these I don't know, drum noise things. Boom whackers. Thank you. And suddenly you hang out boom whackers and everybody's wondering what's going on. And I know it's very simple, but the metaphor behind it, just getting everybody involved and enthusiastic and excited about something they have no clue how it's going to pan out, I thought that was really empowering and really set a great tone for the entire conference.
People could kind of come and go as they please without kind of registering in each one of them. Like a lot of conferences, you register in advance for the kind of sessions you want to go to. It's not you don't really choose as you go and moving in and out of the different tracks, if you will.
It was a great joy to me to spend time around the camp and see the discussions on climate change and see the discussions that were taking place in Afghanistan and the Americas.
There was a tone that was set that made, I think, a lot of people who often wouldn't want to speak in those kinds of forums feel comfortable doing that. And feel comfortable doing that in a way that was meaningful and that actually added to the discussion.
There was no preconception that you're going there as an expert, and I think that let a lot of people who might ordinarily have stayed very, very quiet actually express an opinion.
The atmosphere on the day of was so excited, and people were really in the mood to collaborate, and a lot of people came up to us after and said they'd really been activated and engaged in the dialogues during the camp.
I loved that people could set their own topics. I thought that was really empowering and really got to address a lot of things that people attend conferences don't necessarily get to talk about.
To displace yourself to go and have a discussion about Canada's place in the world, I think fundamentally goes to a passion for the entity of Canada and how it does figure in the world. I think, and the survey results bore this out, there was some frustration at Canada's current participation in the world, which fueled the desire to get there and participate and become problem solvers around the issue of Canada's position in the world.
We got to see, older academics who are used to only talking to other academics, talking to students and young people who are working, in fields that aren't related to foreign policy. And we got to see, high-level policymakers also talking to these young people and talking to them as equals. It was really exciting for both sides. It was exciting for the older people to see that young people are engaged and interested in these issues, and it was exciting for the young people to see these, older role models and mentors really caring what they had to say.
A high degree of responsiveness to, here's my idea, but what's your idea, and what is the hybridization of those things? What does it bring forward, and how do we agree through this consultation, through democratic discussion of bringing together of those ideas? So the atmosphere was excellent in that regard.
I was hearing what I was hoping Canadians would be talking about as opposed to what the Canadian government was presenting as the outside face of Canada.
Well, that Afghanistan roundtable was really something else. We can't talk too much about it because it was Chatham House rules and that stuff, but the pretty genuinely eclectic group of people Canada's World was able to bring together into that boardroom and sort of render titles not irrelevant. People knew who was with who and stuff, but rendered them less important.
It was such a difficult subject. I mean, so fraught in every respect. Shauna's skill and experience as a facilitator paid huge dividends there. Because she was able to smoothly navigate through many of the potential pitfalls of an issue as possibly divisive as Afghanistan, and was able to carry that conversation from its very beginning, where we were dealing with the history of Canada's engagement, through to what next, and how might we try and bring creativity and imagination and innovation to what everybody agrees is a very difficult contemporary situation.
We saw instances in that roundtable of poets putting, like political science professors in their place.
C'était totalement ouvert. Les gens autour de la table proposaient des idées, tout ça. Il y avait des gens de tous les niveaux. Il y avait peut-être un peu plus d'experts, un peu plus d'étudiants que des gens d'autres milieux. Mais quand même, je pense qu'on n'a pas ressenti ce manque-là parce que tout le monde avait des idées à proposer.
I was very impressed with how Shauna was able to keep everything in line in that room, because there were so many professionals, so to speak. Some of the so-called professionals, it was harder for them, I think, at the beginning to let go of the fact that their knowledge is more important than the knowledge of other people who don't necessarily have any specific training. For Canada's World to have been able to do that, along with the live streaming, along with the live minute taking and report writing, with what seemed to be like a fairly minimal staff presence, is an amazing feat.
Avec la session Relations Canada-Afrique, ça a été vraiment une expérience beaucoup plus bénéfique parce que j'ai rencontré beaucoup de gens et j'ai trouvé des gens qui étaient vraiment, automatiquement, ils devenaient des amis, tout le monde était enthousiaste, tout le monde était prêt à partager les idées amicalement. Et c'était multiculturel, c'était des idées très enrichissantes. Et on sentait que l'Afrique, c'est une opportunité très très importante pour le Canada et même pour le reste du monde.
Rather than a continent that was in need, we were looking specifically as a continent that was filled with opportunity, whether as a place for learning from indigenous knowledge to economic opportunity. We had people that had masters in the subject, we had people that just had an interest in the subject, we had people who had lived in Africa their entire life and had moved to Canada, we had professors.
Les gens qui venaient, c'était des gens qui venaient qui n'avaient pas même des intérêts, sinon quel intérêt de voir leurs idées mises en application.
We had a number of laptops set up where we could show video that sort of highlighted a number of the themes that we wanted to hit during the course of the dialogue at the Foreign Policy Camp. So we had videos from a number of different organizations that were highlighting, the importance of the girl child to community development. We had a few speakers who were actually on our panel who had done presentations that we could highlight some of the presentations that they had done outside of the Foreign Policy Camp on YouTube, and we were able to brainstorm ideas and lay them out physically on the wall. And as with other Canada's World Dialogue, is really good at aligning the similar themes and showing where the group was finding a lot of synthesis with our ideas.
I helped moderate and organize a session within Foreign Policy Camp that had to do with the Arctic. Because I am the type of person who wanted to have a little bit of structure, I globbed onto a session as quickly as I could, so at least I'd have some structure to my life in organizing the conference. However, despite my many hours of planning, within the first 15 minutes of the session, it was a whole day session, I realized that all my planning was for naught because it just wasn't going to happen the way it was going to happen. So after sweating a number of buckets of water at the beginning of my session, I just sort of said, I've got to go with this the way it is. But it turned out to be very good. We had, I think, 6 or 7 experts who participated, including one who phoned in from Scotland through our global connection, internet connection through the web. So that was kind of cool to see someone who was, number one, doing it from Scotland, but even was willing to commit to, to half an hour of her time. That whole part of the session was kind of interesting for me. We had somebody else from Calgary come in as well. So we had, I think, in total about 8 or 9 expert participants. Not as many kind of regular everyday outside participants who came in and actually participated in the debate. So I was a little bit disappointed at the beginning because I'd expected 20 to 30 people in addition to my expert participants, and it just didn't work out that way for the reason that Foreign Policy Camp is the way it is. You never know what you're going to get. Somebody will be there, somebody might not. Well, and ironically, in the afternoon, we had more people come in, but certainly the quality of the people that attended were just great. I mean, they literally ran the whole session almost without me being there. And they were fantastic in terms of just getting along with each other, leading debates, lively. They were respectful of each other. They engaged with the audience, enough in a way that I think the people that were there to participate felt included. And the substantive debates were great. I mean, we covered all of the things that I'd hoped to cover in my structured guide. It just wasn't done from A to B. It was kind of A to M and then back to C and then down to Z and W. I mean, it went all over the place, but there was at least enough of the core of what we wanted to get at the end of the day that I think was a real success.
J'ai participé à Vancouver à 2 sessions. Je suis allée bien sûr à celle sur l'Arctique. J'étais curieuse de voir comment eux avaient abordé les choses. Ils ont abordé les choses un peu de la même manière que nous, avec des experts en début de session. Mais par contre, le côté expert, information de base était beaucoup plus court que le nôtre.
Even though it had started out to be this very structured session in my mind, turned out to be something completely different, but from a process point of view, it worked very well.
The Asia Pacific Foundation organized the Asia Pacific Foreign Policy Case Study. It's an interesting mix of people, mostly Vancouver-based, who we would call Canada-Asia specialists or Canada-Asia practitioners. So these are academics, industry leaders, community leaders from the Asian Canadian community. And among the students who were there and other participants, there were international exchange students and Canadian students who have been to Asia and sharing their experiences. So we had conversations that were really wide-ranging. It's almost unprecedented to have that kind of sustained dialogue for, a couple hours with such a mixed bag of people talking about the unifying question: how do we get Asia on the mental map of Canadians? So really thinking about Asia specifically, especially here on the West Coast, we're connected by the Pacific, and Northeast Asia is really close by. We have a significant Asian influence in the province, and yet most people don't think about it a lot, and this is changing and increasingly important that we do think about it. So that was a driving question. Everyone was really excited to have this conversation and had a really good appetite for this conversation because, as many people expressed, this kind of conversation doesn't happen enough, or the opportunity doesn't happen enough for, whether it's a diversity of participants and discussants, or in terms of profession and background and expertise, or age. It was really great to have the barriers broken down with these kind of very respected academics and thinkers and industry leaders or sector leaders coming in and having side-by-side conversations with none of the usual hierarchy or apprehensive senses of status, or just broken down, and everyone being equals in this conversation, at least for these 2 hours. And I think that was really refreshing for both some of the older participants and some of the younger participants. Everyone was really excited to have this conversation and had a really good appetite for this conversation because, as many people expressed, this kind of conversation doesn't happen enough. Whether it's a diversity of participants in terms of profession and background and expertise, or age. It was really great to have the barriers broken down with these kind of very respected academics and thinkers and industry leaders or sector leaders coming in and having side-by-side conversations with none of the usual hierarchy or apprehensive senses of status, or just broken down, and everyone being equals in this conversation.
I ended up delivering a session on the role of diaspora communities in Canadian foreign policy. We had about 25 people with us for the better part of an afternoon, representing a variety of different actors, NGOs working in international peace and development, academic institutions, some private citizens, old people, young people, people of all different ethnocultural backgrounds, different religious faiths. I thought that was terrific. And we had a really good discussion on what the role should be of diaspora Canadians in contributing to the definition of Canada's role in the world.
C'est quand même retrouvé avec une tâche quand même assez colossale d'organiser un événement de septembre à novembre, alors en 2 mois et demi. C'est ici à Montréal, avec l'Université du Québec à Montréal et l'Université de Montréal, on s'est mis ensemble, on était une équipe de 4 avec 2 professeurs pour nous diriger dans tout ça. Le but de la journée, c'est justement d'organiser une session ouverte. On avait 2 thèmes en matinée, une sur l'article et une sur le développement international, tout ça d'une perspective canadienne, politique étrangère.
Il avait pour but justement de se tenir, d'être un deuxième volet, une deuxième facette du gros camp de politique étrangère qui se tenait à Vancouver et qui réunissait des gens de partout ailleurs au Canada.
Au sein de l'UQAM, c'était quelque chose qu'on voit rarement. Seulement les open sessions sont très, très dirigées malgré tout, avec les questions, avec les intervenants, tout ça. Mais c'est la première fois qu'on se retrouvait à organiser une session comme ça de discussion participative où n'importe qui peut participer, monsieur, madame, tout le monde. Donc, les possibilités étaient illimitées. On pouvait vraiment puiser dans n'importe quel réseau de contacts, réseau social, professionnel, gouvernemental, communautaire. Donc, ça a été un plaisir de chercher un peu dans tous les niveaux de la société qu'est-ce que les gens pensent de l'Arctique au Canada. Puis on était en contact avec des gens au Nunavut pour essayer justement d'avoir leurs impressions avec d'autres chercheurs spécialistes qui sont ici à Montréal. On avait un d'Ottawa, un du Nunavut, un de Greenpeace. Et que ça a été un plaisir de